Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime as Liverpool are playing in yet another football match. It feels like they are just coming at us at a ridiculous rate at the moment. And as fans, that's great. It's absolutely fantastic that Liverpool are playing constantly. I enjoy making these videos as well, so it's great to be in front of the camera constantly doing pre- and post-match content and all that. But for the players, it's not ideal. And after playing that game against Leicester on Sunday night, where Liverpool were fantastic despite the fact that they came into that game with a depleted squad, we are going to have to play yet again just 72 hours later with a home match against Atalanta in the Champions League at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night. And it's a pretty big game because Liverpool can qualify for the knockout stages with a win after just 4 games. And when you consider how we've kind of made a meal of it in the past, you know, the last 3 times we've been in the Champions League, which is of course the last 3 seasons, we have had to take it down to the final day to qualify from the group stage. Some of those games have been a little bit tighter than others. You know, the 7-0 against Spartak Moscow was something of a given by the end of the game, whereas of course the game against Napoli was an absolute nail-biter. But of course it's a fantastic thing for Liverpool that we could actually manage to make the knockout stages with a couple of games to spare, especially given the season we're in at the moment and the fact that we could kind of do with a few dead rubbers. It'd be nice to bring Ajax to Anfield and to travel away to Midtjylland, if we're allowed to do that, of course, because there's a whole subplot brewing there about travel restrictions and whether or not Liverpool will be able to go, but we won't get into that too early. But it would be great to go into both those games knowing that we can essentially field second string League Cup style sides and give everyone else a little bit of a rest, because God knows, do they need it? And that is the really difficult question for Jurgen Klopp going into this game, given the huge position of strength Liverpool are in their group at the moment. 5 points ahead of any other team. Both Ajax and Atalanta have only got 4 points, whereas Midtjylland have got absolutely none so far. We are so far away ahead of the chasing pack, and you've kind of got to make a decision of whether you consolidate that lead and you look to get it done tonight, or you think that lead is comfortable enough that we can be a little bit careful and, you know, we're not going to look to throw the game. I doubt Jurgen Klopp is going to just throw out the under-23s or the under-18s and just allow us to lose the game, no matter what's happening with the injury situation. But you can be a little bit less hell for leather. And I think given the injury situation at the moment, that would be entirely understandable. It's a really difficult call for us to make because, like I said, if you do win, then you buy yourself 2 free games essentially a little bit later on in December, which is so important. But you look ahead to there and you think, well, maybe our squad's a little bit more replenished. There's certain players who are out injured at the moment, but it's small muscle injuries that are maybe only going to take a couple of weeks, and you think, well, maybe we can look ahead to those games against Ajax and Midtjylland and say, well, we should have enough lads back to do the job in that game, even if we do have to rotate a little bit. But of course, there is that enticing thing about a win putting us into the knockouts, and also the fact that we don't just want to make it through, we want to win the group as well. We want to actually get first place and consolidate that early, preferably. That would be nice to do that with a game to spare as well, which I think we would do with a decent result against Ajax, and we might even do if Ajax don't get a good result against Midtjylland at the same time tomorrow night. But to be honest, I think Liverpool are going to go with a kind of middling approach. I think we are going to see rotation. I'll come on to the exact team I think we're going to play in a moment. I think we'll move players around. We'll look at players who are in what's called like the red zone, where they have been pretty much overworked to within an inch of a serious injury, and you think even if you give them half an hour or 45 minutes on Wednesday night, they're at risk of pulling up and just piling up the injury problems that we've already got. And you think, well, they can come out the side, but anyone who's able to just power through for this one, you put them in and you hope that you get the result that gets you over the line and puts you into the knockouts, and then of course buys you that all-important breathing space. So in terms of players that are actually available for Liverpool, the big news going into this match is the fact that Mohamed Salah has returned to training. He's returned a negative coronavirus test. He did, of course, unfortunately miss out against Leicester, although thankfully Liverpool did the business and did it in style without him, because we are, of course, a fantastic team from top to bottom. But a player like Mohamed Salah, a fella who scores as many goals as Mohamed Salah, is, of course, absolutely invaluable to any side, and that side includes the current champions of England and the world. So Mo Salah will be a huge boost for Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp didn't say for sure that he was going to be back for this game. He said that he was back in training, he's available, he's testing negative, so he's allowed to integrate with the squad again. And he kind of said, we'll see about his availability. So maybe Jurgen just wants to take a look at him in training sessions and stuff like that to see whether there is maybe just a slight drop off from the fact that he obviously missed out in team training. You imagine he will have been in gyms and keeping fit and everything. There's no doubt he will have been doing that while he was self-isolating, but it is, of course, a totally different thing to be training day in and day out with your teammates. And I think maybe if he tested negative on Saturday and then the game came around now and he'd had 3 or 4 days on the training ground, then it'd be a no-brainer. But I'm sure Jurgen Klopp just wants to make absolutely sure. And of course, he's never going to give anything away about his lineup. And if we do want to be rotating, if we do want to be resting players, and that of course includes the attackers, especially the ones that played against Leicester, then if he says Mo Salah's guaranteed to be available, if he says Mo Salah's definitely fit and ready to play, then it's almost guaranteed he would play, and you don't really want to be giving away those kind of secrets. But if you ask me, Mo Salah, if he's available, if he's fit, which he almost definitely is, and he has of course tested negative for coronavirus, then I think he's kind of a shoo-in to start this game. Elsewhere, Firmino missed out of the training session today, although the club have reassured us that there is absolutely nothing wrong there. He of course put in a brilliant performance against Leicester, so it'd be nice for him to put in another one and essentially put himself back into the good form that we know that he can show in a Liverpool shirt. So thankfully there's no chance of that not happening, at least not happening because of injuries on Wednesday night. He's probably just been rested a little bit, as is kind of understandable at the moment. I mean, one thing Jurgen Klopp did say in his press conference is that any kind of tactical work or game-specific preparation where you're analysing an opponent and trying to rehearse ways to break them down and stuff like that, he essentially said all of that work is now done in the meeting room. None of it can be done on the training ground because there simply isn't the time, and that's something that he's been critical of in the past. You look back to his first season where he complained about the size of the fixture list with League Cup games, of course, the run to the final and the run to the Europa League final as well. We essentially played weekend, midweek, all the way through the season, and Klopp lamented the fact that he couldn't do any tactical work on the training ground with his players when they were out there on those pitches. It was all about fitness. It was all about just managing players very carefully to keep them ticking over, to keep them sharp without pushing them too hard that they get any kind of injury. And we know that Liverpool's training sessions are intense as well, so it's no surprise that they have to be careful and very carefully manage how players get through those training sessions without picking up any injuries. So it's important that players play themselves into form in games. It's important we have good performances like the one on Sunday, because that's what boosts the players. That's what helps them gel, because it's very difficult for them to do anything like that on the training ground. In terms of other players that are and aren't going to be available, Jurgen Klopp essentially said that any of the other lads who weren't available for the game against Leicester aren't going to be back for this game. So that of course includes Thiago, who we still don't kind of have a time scale on, but various journalists who are close to the club have said that we're hopeful he plays on Saturday. Of course, Jurgen Klopp remains tight-lipped on that. He's never really wanted to put any kind of prognosis for a return time on this Thiago injury, and the latest press conference was, of course, no different. And the same goes for Jordan Henderson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. But the headline is that Thiago is hopefully going to be back either this weekend or some point over the next couple of weeks, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the same goes for Henderson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. But in the meantime, none of those players will be available for this match against Atalanta on Wednesday night. So as for how I think Liverpool are actually going to line up then, the goalie picks itself. It's going to be Alisson Becker, of course. I think I have said in the past, I don't know if I've actually mentioned it on this channel, but I do think when you get those couple of games, if they are dead rubbers, and especially if Liverpool have ensured that they're going to be first in the group, then I'd actually quite like to see a little bit of rotation in the goalkeeper department, partially because given Alisson having already picked up an injury this season, I know goalkeepers don't really get them from being overplayed, but you can get freak injuries. Someone could fly kick him like Jordan Pickford, and before you know it, he's out for the season. I don't want to be like a downer, but that kind of stuff can happen, and you wouldn't want to risk that in a dead rubber. So listen, if Liverpool have qualified for the knockout stages, then maybe for the last couple of games, certainly against Midtjylland away, if we of course do actually get to play that game, I'd quite like to see a backup goalie, partially also because I don't think Adrian's good enough, and I think you want to have someone other than him to call on if Alisson's not available, because we've kind of, I think the ship sailed a bit with Adrian. Listen, if we play him in a few more games and he gets to play himself back into form, then brilliant, fantastic. But I'd rather see a little bit more of the other lads. You've got Kevin Kelleher, and listen, why keep him around if you're not going to use him at some point if he's not good enough to play for Liverpool? And the same goes for this new lad, Marcelo Pitaluga from Brazil. I know he's only like 17 or 18 years old and he's been playing with the under-18s at the moment, but but why not give him a little bit of experience? Why not let him have a run out? So listen, if Alisson does pick up an injury, you've got an option other than Adrian San Miguel, because like I said, the ship's kind of sailed with Adrian. You can't really put him in the side now without it being an issue, without us all kind of immediately sweating on it before the game, and that translates to the players. I know they will deny it in interviews and they won't say that they don't back him as their goalkeeper, but you can see it in body language, in the way they play. They don't seem to trust him in the same way that they trust Alisson. So I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but essentially what I'm saying is it would be good to win on Wednesday night, because that gives you the opportunity to rotate, and I honestly think it would be quite good to see some of the other goalkeepers that Liverpool have got on their roster, just to see whether or not we have got decent backup for Alisson, or whether or not we need to maybe look into the transfer market for a potential backup there. But in the meantime, I think Alisson is definitely going to start between the sticks in this game. Ahead of him, I think the centre halves are going to be Joel Matip and Reece Williams. Nat Phillips, of course, not eligible because he wasn't included in the Champions League squad, which at the time no one was really fussed about, and now feels like a major error on Liverpool's part. But, you know, you roll with the punches. That's what Liverpool have been doing already this season, and it's worked pretty well so far. We're top of the Champions League group without having conceded a goal, and I think Reece Williams, as long as he has overcome that little hip injury that he picked up on England under-21's duty, and I think he's a shoo-in to start this game. There is, of course, the question of whether or not Matip or Fabinho partners up with him. Personally, I'd rather see Matip, because obviously if it's Fabinho, I know he's been brilliant, but he's still not necessarily an orthodox centre-half, and I think maybe he will play better alongside someone like Joel Matip, who's an experienced, proper centre-half, whereas Reece Williams is still finding his way in the team a little bit. And also, I've said before on this channel, I think Reece Williams has an air of Van Dijk about him, not in terms of quality, of course, just yet, because he's such a young lad, but certainly in terms of playing style. And I think personally, in terms of how they complement each other, Virgil van Dijk and Joel Matip have always looked like a great pairing. They've been so solid at the back for Liverpool when they both start as the centre halves. So I think it'd be good to see Reece Williams start alongside Joel Matip, to see whether that dynamic exists there as well. And I think, of course, that then means that you have Fabinho available and rested for the game against Brighton at the weekend. And then either side of them, this is where I think Liverpool are going to bring the changes as well. I think Kostas Tsimikas is a shoo-in to start this game. If he isn't, then Jurgen Klopp and the medical staff are playing with fire massively by using Andrew Robertson in this game. You could potentially argue that Robertson plays in this one and Tsimikas plays against Brighton, if there's maybe something tactical that they've spotted there, where Tsimikas suits that Brighton game more and Robertson suits the Atalanta game more. But given the fact that Robertson was run into the ground on international duty with Scotland, picked up an injury, recovered from it, played another game, all before he actually came back on Liverpool duty, and then played the full 90 minutes and played an absolute blinder against Leicester, I think now is definitely the time to rest him. I don't think you can get away with giving the lad another hour, let alone 90 minutes. And listen, if Tsimikas needs to get a game somewhere, and I think this is the perfect opportunity for him to get it. And then I think on the right-hand side, you go with Nico Williams as the right back. And that will make sense when I move on to the midfield, which I think is going to be a midfield three. And therefore, Milner kind of has to occupy that space, because the midfielders are dropping like flies. And if anything, I think the situation there is almost worse than the defence, because the defence so far, the backups seem pretty capable. You know, Reece Williams is a very good, albeit developing centre-half. Nat Phillips has proved that in a horses for courses scenario, where we play him in games that suit his strengths, he is more than good enough to wear the Liverpool shirt for 90 minutes. And it feels like we've just got more options coming through the youth setup there, whereas centre mid, it's a whole different ball game. And I think if we're to play a midfield three against Atalanta, and I think we will, and you rule out Fabinho, of course, because he's part of the back line for the foreseeable future, then we're essentially down to three players. It will almost definitely be Gini Wijnaldum in the six, who of course did brilliantly against Leicester. Curtis Jones, who had probably one of the best games of his Liverpool career against Leicester, one side of him, and then the other side of him, James Milner, who looked, you know, almost a man reborn on Sunday evening, and put in a very, very good shift when he actually moved up to centre mid. I think he's been used as a utility man in and around the back line so much that we've almost forgotten James Milner is a very, very good midfielder. So I'd have no qualms with those three starting, but I do think if one of them gets injured, I honestly have no idea what Liverpool do. I think you definitely have to look into a formation change. And listen, if Shaqiri was guaranteed to be fit, and I know he missed out for the game against Leicester due to an injury issue, and we haven't really had any updates since then on whether he's available. But if he is available on Wednesday night, I think maybe he plays, and we look at that kind of 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 hybrid system where Shaqiri is nominally part of the midfield three, but is a lot more advanced. And while he does track back and do a bit more work than maybe he's done in the past when playing for Liverpool in maybe his first season where he was used more as part of the attack, he's still a bit further forward than a player like Gini Van Alden or Jordan Henderson would be in that role, for example. So listen, if Shaqiri's available, by all means, I think he goes in because we need to give one of those midfielders a rest already, again, looking ahead to that game against Brighton. And you do kind of have to consider these two games as a package deal in that context. Even, I don't really want the same three midfielders lining up in both matches. But as it stands, that might just have to be what Liverpool do. But in the meantime, I think it is going to be Jones, Milner and Gini Van Alden as the midfield three. And then ahead of them, I think Salah is, like I said, a shoo-in to start this game. I think he comes in on the right. I think Firmino comes back into the team. Jurgen Klopp will have seen that brilliant performance, and I think will want to capitalise on that momentum by giving Firmino another start. And I think Champions League games do suit him. I'm not saying he's not suited to the Premier League, but certainly when he's been red hot for Liverpool, it's under the lights in these European matches where he's really shone. You look back to that 17-18 campaign where I think it was 10 goals and 8 assists or something ridiculous like that. I know he hit double figures for goals and scored some really important ones along the way. So these are the kind of situations where you imagine he'll do very well against Atalanta as well. I'll come on in a moment to how I think they're going to set up and how it might differ from that first game back in Bergamo a few weeks ago. But I do think he'll be afforded a little bit of space, and he'll certainly be given opportunities to get another goal and hopefully really get his Liverpool form back on track. So I think he starts in this match, and I think Sadio Mane gets a little bit of a rest, and Takumi Minamino comes into the side. Jurgen Klopp spoke about Minamino in his press conference today and said that basically he's not doing anything wrong. It's not like he's not showing up in training and he's showing up in the sort of performance sense, not in the literal sense that he's not there, but it's not like he's just not good enough and they don't think that he should be starting for Liverpool. It's just a matter of when it comes to injuries, the attack is the only place where we haven't really suffered. It's the only place where we're still stacked full of players, and it becomes very difficult to get into that Liverpool front line because the lads who do play in that front line seem to just score pretty much every game. So it's a tough gig to get hold of. But I do think, given that we will be seeing rotation, I think Jota, while he was brilliant against Leicester, you want to rest him for this game. And listen, he's almost as good, if not better, coming off the bench than he is starting matches. So he's, of course, an absolutely deadly option to have available if you want to throw him on if things aren't going your way. And the same goes for Sadio Mane as well. And it's worth bearing in mind, we've got those 5 substitutions. So if things aren't working out, if Takumi Minamino has a bad 45 minutes and it just isn't going his way and it's not his night, then it's so easy for Jurgen Klopp to hook him. So this is kind of an area where he really can experiment a little bit, and lads who maybe haven't had as much game time as you'd hope from them can be thrown in not a risk-free environment. It's still a European Cup match after all, but an environment where if things go wrong, it might not have an adverse impact on the result and the overall performance in the same way that it would in a Premier League match. So personally, I just like to see Takumi Minamino get a chance, and I think while Liverpool are going to be look to rotate in those forward areas, I think he's the lad who you'd probably get in over maybe someone like Divock Origi, who's not quite as suited to the system. So taking a quick look at Atalanta then, I think it's going to be very interesting how they actually approach this game, because of course they were taken apart in their own backyard. I think it's fair to say. I know we bigged up that game as like not a clash of the titans, but certainly very much an attack v attack kind of game where you expected goals at both ends. And I think if there's one major positive takeaway from that game in Bergamo, it's that Liverpool kept a clean sheet. That in itself is maybe even better than the 5 goals, because we always knew we were going to get chances against Atalanta's defence. That was kind of a given because of the way they play. They almost accept that they're going to score goals and just back themselves to score more at the other end. And that's why it's so impressive that not only did Liverpool score more goals than them, but limited them to absolutely none at all. And that was a team effort as well. I think we defended well. Reece Williams came in and played an absolutely excellent game, so hopefully we see more of that tomorrow night. But also Alisson Becker put in some fantastic saves in some pretty difficult situations. There were a few one-on-one chances that Atalanta had, and he showed why he's one of the best goalkeepers in the world. And to be honest, I think the best when it comes to those one-on-one situations. He's very good in terms of speed off his line, positioning and stuff like that. But It'll be interesting to see whether they definitely take a more reserved approach to this game. I certainly don't think they'll leave themselves that open. They won't play that kind of high line, and they might even look to approach it the same way Liverpool did in the away match, where we let them have the ball, we let them come onto us and hit them with absolutely blistering counter-attacks. I think it will almost be like a role reversal where you expect Liverpool to have more possession, and we'll have to be really, really wary of how Atalanta come onto us. So I don't think this is going to be 5-0 by any stretch of the imagination. I think it will be a much, much tighter game, partially also because Liverpool are going to have to be very, very careful how they approach this, not just tactically, but also in terms of player fitness. We can't run the players into the ground this time. You know, we can't do what we did, just taking a recent example, at the Etihad a couple of weeks ago. We started that game on like a house on fire. We went at it for the first half hour, and that was very much the game plan. You could see that was a premeditated assault on the Man City defence to just really go hell for leather in the opening stages. We can't afford that luxury now. Liverpool have got to manage games much more carefully, and we can't look at this match and think, in an ideal world, we win 5-0. We look at this match and think the plan is to go into this game, manage it all the way through, and probably win it 2-0. And listen, 5-0 would be great, and if it happens, it happens. But I don't think that's what Jurgen Klopp and his coaching staff and the players as well will be looking to achieve. I think they go into this with the express intention of getting 3 points and getting no injuries. And what's going to be really interesting is whether or not Atalanta are fine with that or not, because I know that sounds ridiculous. They're not going to come to Anfield and roll over. But when you look at their position in the group, I think they're much more focused on getting a win against Midtjylland, which I think is their next game. And then, of course, their last match will be against Ajax. That's the game that they're probably looking at and thinking that's where we decide our destiny and find out whether or not we're going to make the knockout stages or not. They're probably almost looking at this as a free hit. And as a result, maybe they do play a little bit more open. Maybe they do come out at Liverpool a little bit more and try to put in a good performance over getting a decent result out of the match. But like I said, I certainly think we'll see a shift in dynamic on the pitch, and I do think Liverpool will have more of the ball, will have more of it in their half. And if we are to score goals, it's not going to be those beautiful counter-attacks like we had in Bergamo. We're probably not going to see Mo Salah score directly from an opposition corner or anything like that. It will be more like Liverpool having to break down the opposition. You know, I think back to when we played Maribor in the European Cup back in autumn of 2017, and we beat them 7-0 in their own backyard, and then they come to Anfield a few weeks later and have a totally different game plan. And yes, they lose 3-0 because they're Maribor and they weren't very good at the end of the day, but they managed to make it a more honourable result by kind of respecting the fact that they were minnows in that context. And Atalanta, of course, aren't minnows. They are going to give us a decent game, but I think they will come to Anfield respecting the fact that they have to acknowledge Liverpool are the better team and they have to accommodate that into their tactics. And I think as a result, we'll see a much tighter game, a much more balanced game, but hopefully a game that Liverpool will come away with all 3 points. So that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, as always, you know what to do by now. Hit the like button down there. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back tomorrow evening after we've hopefully beaten Atalanta and booked our place in the Champions League knockouts. Until then, bye for now.